I actually published in one or two of my books a telepathy session that we did with Gail, because Gail is one of those people who just has psychic things happening all the time. And so I put Gail into the category of somebody who is truly a natural psychic because she's not trying to do anything. It's just that she's, as compared to many people, she doesn't have the same kind of filters that other people have.
Gail Hayssen has worked as a successful subject in parapsychology experiments with Dr. Dean Radin, Russell Targ, and others. She's been featured in numerous books, documentaries, and papers, including the film Third Eye Spies. Gail has received an Honorary Ph.D. from the National Academy of Sciences in Mongolia. She's been having anomalous experiences since she was a child and is well known for her remote viewing abilities. Gail has a plethora of fascinating and enlightening stories to share and is also the host of her own podcast, A Small Medium at Large. Please see the description for relevant links, recommended books, and timestamps. So Gail, to start us off, can you please tell me a little bit about your background, your earlier life, and about your first anomalous experiences, please?
Okay, so my background.
You can go wherever you want with it.
Okay, I'll just have to start with it. I grew up in New York City.
Yeah.
And in an unconventional family. And we were raised from when I was 5 on, we became vegans.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was not into education. He felt that it was a brainwashing institution. Of course, I excelled in school. If I brought up a good report card, he'd say,
Yeah, disappointed with your high grades.
Right, my rebelling. And we were exposed to very interesting things that in the early 60s was not popular. So now everything is, but I always have to laugh when people tell me about wheatgrass juice or, I'm saying my father grew wheatgrass back in 1962 in our yard,
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to the unusual characters that my dad brought into our life, because he was involved in the Theosophical Society and he was interested in spirituality. And he was a searcher. He was, he was out there seeking the better ways of living a healthy life. That was his most important thing, was that the body and the lifestyle had to be around health. He wasn't interested in making money or what your successes and things like this were. He was interested in healthy living.
Yeah.
I got to meet interesting characters when we lived in the commune, because we'd have guest speakers that would come. That was my first exposure to UFOs, was back in 62, when one of the people who had come showed me, as a little girl, I was 6 or 7 at the time, showed me pictures of, the flying saucer he'd gone up in, and told me all about the flying saucer experience. It's something you don't forget as a child, because no other people ever came up and showed you things like that.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of, we were not allowed to have doctors or dentists. So the healing that I got to see after horrific things like my dad being in incredible car accidents or having, different sicknesses and things, I saw that all the healing was done without, modern Western medicine.
Wow.
So that's an unusual thing, back then.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of information he had then that, families didn't want me going over and being with their kids, because they thought my parents were a little too crazy. And now, and all the years later, one of the fathers came to me, and he's now passed on, but he was in his late 80s, and he said, "I was wrong. Your father was right." He said, "Now I live a vegetarian life, and it's what's kept me alive and my heart in good shape." So it was an interesting, so there was a little of difficulties for me, because I was never fitting in school correctly. Because I'd have a carrot in the lunch and everybody else had a sandwich. That wasn't only the way that I was different, because I was a different child. I wasn't like a regular child, in that my dad's friends in the Theosophical Society of places would say, "Do you realize your daughter's a very spiritual child?" So I would be told things like this, and I would have experiences when I was young of just a knowingness of things. So sometimes I would know when someone was going to die, or people that were older and dying or in beds would want me to come and sit with them or hold their hand, and I didn't think anything of any of these things. It seemed like the right thing for me to do also. And I never wanted to ever hurt anyone. I had certain, I think somebody might have said, I was like an old soul, or a person that was much older than their ages. Mm-hmm. So when people would ask me about things and I would talk to them, they'd say, she's 10, but I think she's going on 25,
Yeah. Wise beyond your years.
Yeah. Yes. And I don't know where or where this is, coming from, but this was sort of what it was like. But consequently, I also felt like I didn't belong a lot, and I never felt in groups in school or these kind of things like I was, I was going to be the popular person or I was going to fit in, or I always felt like I didn't fit in and that I was different. Now I honor it, but then as a child and growing up, it seemed more challenging and difficult to deal with.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Let's see, growing up. At age 15, I moved out of my home on my own, and I left New York with a very close friend who became my boyfriend for a few years, and he was dodging the Vietnam War and the draft. Mm-hmm. So we lived hiding out in different places, and we came to California and left New York, and we'd be hiding while the FBI would be coming and, knocking on our doors at his parents and my parents and saying, where are they? Yeah. And I would start having psychic, intuitive, or precognitive, whatever the word you want to use. But I would know when the FBI would come to my house in New York, even though I was sleeping in California. Really? So I'd have a dream that night, and I'd be answering the door in the dream, and there'd be these men in suits, and I'd know that they were the FBI. Then I'd get a call the next day from my grandmother, who only spoke Yiddish, and she would say, the ABC was here, the ABC was here. She didn't get the FBI name down. And so I was having things like that happening to me before I did any particular training or any kind of things like this. Mm-hmm. So I would just say I naturally had good gut level or intuitive feelings about things. And I would dream things that could come true in the future, or I would be with a healthy person and know that they were actually going to die soon. So there would be those kind of messages I would feel. Yeah. I'm not a vision person. I didn't have lots of visions in those growing up where like I saw somebody in a corner or I saw the shadow of something. For me, it's always been an auditory thing where I just sort of hear information. Okay. And when people ask me, I just say, I really can't tell you how or why this happens to me. I can't. I can just say when it does, I just know that that's what that is. I know it's a different voice. Yeah. At age 16, I think I was about 16, which you might have read in the Medium stories that I have on Medium, I became involved. My whole family did. We went to a lecture from someone named Werner Erhard, who the young people nowadays wouldn't know, but people in the 70s, he was very well known as, the guru of self-help programs. And he became a multimillionaire overnight selling this program. And people like me and my father were the shills, as Russell called it, or the people that ended up helping to sell his workshop to people by going up and giving them demonstrations. Right. So when I took this course, the reason we all took it is because the hook and the line of it would be they'd have a person sitting up on stage or in a living room. Back then it was in a living room because it was small. I was in the second class that Werner Erhard ever did. And we were me and my brothers were the only kids that were everybody else was white, middle class, accomplished sort of people that were there. You didn't see any Asian people there. You didn't see any Black people there. There was no diversity in this. This was really geared to this type of group of people. And they would say to you, in 2 weekends, you'll be able to do what this person can do right now. And I would be that person, one of those kind of people. And you would be told just the name and the age and the city of where the person lived. So I would be sitting there on a chair in front of, a group of people in a living room or in a hotel. And they would say, okay, John Smith lives in Reno, Nevada. He's 47 years old. And that's all you would be told. And you had been trained in those 2 weekends to create a workshop in your mind where you would work on healing these people.
Right.
And that, I would say, would be another unusual thing, that as a teenager, I wasn't into like getting dressed up and going out to dances or something. I really loved the thought of being able to help healing people. So I was fascinated by this, and I put my heart and soul into it, and I did it for close to 2 years. And I think that the techniques were taken from Rosicrucian, he stole techniques from all the different modalities that were out there. And these techniques taught me ways to access information, and actually it was what we would call now remote viewing. And interestingly enough, the same man, Werner Erhard, met my dear friend Russell Targ back in the 70s, in the early 70s, and he gave $50,000 to the SRI research going on then about remote viewing. So this Werner Erhard supported $50,000 to a program that I ended up participating in, 20 years later.
Yeah, that's
so
crazy.
It kind of felt like a small world,
Yeah, bit of a synchronicity.
Yeah, the synchronicities. So I was doing that, and I didn't have any money. I was living with my boyfriend. We were living on our own, struggling, trying to make ends. I was on food stamps, and I was, working, and I was lying about my age so I could get jobs like I was 18, even though I was only 16. And we were surviving, and we were, my other activity would be going to these Werner Erhard workshops and participating.
Yeah.
So I would see a person, and I would spend like the whole week, every night before I would go to bed, I would do healing on that person, or I would cover them in gold light, or whatever the different techniques they taught you. They taught you techniques if you couldn't fall asleep, or techniques if they were all different mind. Part of it was also Silva mind control. He took things from that group. So there was techniques from all different people that were used in this formulation. And I got to a point that I was doing it so much that it was like before my body would get to a place, I would see everything that was going on in the place before I got there. The phones, every time before a phone would ring, I would know before the phone was going to ring and who was going to call. And it got to be a little, it got to be a little too much. And I started doing a lot of very sick bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was working on healing with a lot of these sick bodies, I ended up having what I would now call something like possession, or, the shady, dark side of things that can happen in this particular world. Right. And I think it was a man that was dying of cancer or emphysema. I'm not sure which one. And it was like he had attached onto my body. And when I went to the organization and to Werner Erhard, who I had been doing all this work for almost 2 years for free, and I said, I'm having this scary thing happening, and I don't know what to do, and I'm afraid to go to sleep at night, and I feel like this is going to take over me.
Yeah.
They said, well, you create your own reality. You'll have to deal with it yourself. And that just blew me away. I mean, I would never treat a person that way, I've had
especially after they've helped you so much, but yeah.
Right. It's not compassionate or whatever. No. So I decided then and there that I would never do anything ever again psychic. I hate that word psychic, but because it makes me think of, big hoop earrings and red lips or something.
Same, crystal balls and
Right. And I'm not that.
Yeah.
And I said I will never do anything again. I think I was 18 when I decided that. I've always wondered, had I stuck with it, what would it be like now? Would I just be walking around seeing everything all the time? And I said, I'll never do any of that again, except for what happens to me naturally.
Right.
And that was enough to keep me busy for the next, 30 years or whatever it was, 25 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I had many dreams that would foretell the future. I had many experiences where someone I know or someone I hardly knew and just met, I would bodily experience their death. So a family relative would be sick and dying, and I would be in California here. They would be in New York. I would feel what was happening, and I'd say to my husband, I'm throwing up here, but this isn't me. I'm not sick.
And
I
you'd be
said,
physically vomiting while
oh yeah,
they're...
vomiting all over, and I'd say, I think this is my Uncle Willie. I
Yeah.
think Uncle Willie just died. So with no information, it's not like somebody called me last week and said Uncle Willie's sick. There's nothing like that.
Mm.
A phone call comes from my sister in New York saying Uncle Willie just died. He woke up throwing up his innards, his guts, and whatever, and they rushed him to the hospital, and he died, shortly, within an hour of being taken to the hospital.
Mm.
And he was a very spiritual man. So I had these kind of things. I would know when I was driving if there could be an accident coming. So I'd swerve around so that I wouldn't end up being in the accident. So I listened to my gut still and my intuition, but I wasn't willing to do anything that was like, this is how we do it, or let's do this kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Until I met Dean Radin and Russell Targ.
Right. Yeah.
And what had happened was my husband worked in this company called Interval Research, and it was set up by Paul Allen, and it was set for a 10-year period to do research that was, it was all, maybe had to have NDAs, you weren't allowed to just walk into the place. They were doing all sorts of different projects. Well, Dean and Russell were invited in there to do something called the Phenom Project. And they were going to do things with remote viewing and studying different experiments with people, and they needed subjects. But they wanted them within the company because that, it's a tight, close-knit group there.
Yeah.
So my husband submits my name and says, I know she doesn't work here, but she wakes up in the morning and tells me things that are going to happen, and then they happen. Is that what you're looking for?
They said, yeah, pretty much.
Yes, they sent her in.
Yeah.
So they sent me in, and they asked me to write what any psychic experiences I'd had through my life.
Mm.
And I had never
took you a while.
Well, my niece, I just dictated, and my niece typed it into the computer for me. Because as I'd say one story, then I'd remember another story, and then another story. And I never thought of documenting them or writing it down or anything like this, because to me it was just the way of living.
Mm.
So after 10 pages of stuff, we said, all right, let's stop here. This is enough to bring them. And when I ended up bringing that in, as I would talk to them, more stories would come out. So we had plenty of stories for them. And at the end of the interview, Dean said he wished he had videotaped it. And Russell said, I want to give you my new book, and I think you should be writing a book yourself.
Yeah.
And that started this other world that opened up for me, where I got to meet all these amazing people. And if my husband hadn't worked at Interval, I never would have met Dean and Russell. Yeah. And I wouldn't be being interviewed by you now, even, probably.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, because so many doors opened, and I got to meet so many interesting people, and some who have passed on. Because knowing them, I got to learn about the Parapsychology Association and the most famous man on ghosts, and people that were coming to be there to present at conferences, and they'd say, Gail, you might like to come to this conference. And so a whole new world opened for me, and I just have to thank them from the bottom of my heart, because it was really them who introduced me to that world.
Yeah, I'm sure they would thank you back for the mutual help that you've given to each other, with you kind of doing these experiments with them and everything like that. I actually have a question from Stanley, who he's the person that connected us, Stanley Krippner. So it's another. You just said that if it wasn't for Dean and Russell, we probably wouldn't be talking. If it wasn't for Stanley, we definitely wouldn't be talking right now.
Exactly.
So yeah. First of all, before I ask you kind of one of Stanley's questions, how did you meet Stan?
I met Stanley as I said, because of working at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is where we were conducting these experiments after integral research.
Mm-hmm.
So I started with Dean and Russell in 1998. And I've been doing experiments with them since, on and off, here and there. And there was a woman that wanted to come up for a conference at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, here in Petaluma, which is now, they've closed that offices. And she needed a ride from Berkeley. So I said, oh, I'll be happy to give you a ride. I work here, volunteer, and then I worked there as a paid employee. But I worked in the research department, and I was assisting in Dean's office. And when I hung up, I said, yeah, some woman named Ruth Inga Hines needs a ride, and she can't get here, so I'm going to go pick her up. Well, when I went to pick her up, before I left, Marilyn Schlitz, who was then, I think, the vice president of IONS, said, when you meet her, she will change your life forever. And I didn't know what she meant about this. And I thought, I thought I'm meeting like maybe a 40-year-old woman. I don't know. So I go and I pick up this woman, and really she's from Germany. She's in her 70s, and she's this intense, powerful woman that's brilliant on Asian shamanism. And she was a Berkeley professor for many years. And she had this conference she put on every year, exactly, never missing any, for 30-something years. And she was called the Conference on Shamanism and Alternative Modes of Healing.
Okay.
I went to the conference, and Stanley has been going to that conference and never missing it, unless for some reason he had to be out of the country. He had not missed one of these since she began. And many, many people, Stanislaus Grof, you had people from all different walks. Shamans would come from all over the world. So in this 3-day conference, you'd sleep there in this, little, it was like a nun's retreat center or something, and they would give it to her to use for those 3 days. All these amazing people would come through that you would never get to see in one spot. So you're not only seeing shamans from Laos, you're seeing them from South America, from Mexico, from Thailand, so they would be from all over, and you'd get to see them all in this one space.
That's so cool.
So when she invited me, she shared her room with me, let me have her room so I didn't have to pay, and she didn't make me pay for the conference. She just wanted me to come. Nice. And she said, and you need to speak. She said, you need to talk. I want you to give a presentation. And I was like, me? What would I, I want to hear what I have to say. Well, it turned out they loved the things I had to say. And that started my sort of career of giving talks back then. And I really loved all the talks I used to do. And Stanley always sat in the front row. And his dearest friend was a woman named Jean Millay. And they were like soul buddies, they knew each other in New York. So they each helped each other's career to blossom. And they were the closest best friends ever. And so she kept telling me, you need to get to know Stanley Krippner. He's such a wonderful person. So she would say, let's have lunch during the conference. And Stanley would join us. And that's where the Stanley relationship began. And I would take her to see him in San Rafael when she was here, and we'd all go to lunch. And that's how I got to meet Stanley for the first time. And also another interesting coincidence was my best friend, Kim, her husband, her father-in-law, was Stanley's closest friend from Germany, in Germany. Right. Yeah. And he was part of the humanistic psychology movement. And so he hadn't seen his friend Dudley in many, many, many years. So since my friend Kim was my good friend, when her father-in-law came to visit them, and he'd only come a couple of times, I made a dinner here for Stanley and him so that they could be together and, have their time together.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where that began in the Stanley Krippner relationship. And I always was willing to do anything, like if he needed a ride or if there was something I could do to help him in any way.
Yeah.
And he has been the most wonderful person in my life, sharing podcast guests with me. I'm in 2 or 3 of his books. I have pieces I've written that he thought should be published. He's been the most wonderfully supportive guy.
Yeah.
And very, at his 90th birthday, I met a man who was possibly going to publish my book, but he was the publisher of Stanley's book. And we've all become friends since, and we're going to have a podcast together in November, late November.
Cool.
Of the 3 of us talking about them publishing Stanley's memoirs.
Nice.
So I guess Stanley and I got involved some way. I want to say it's been 15 years, maybe 20, something in that time period. So I would see him at every conference, at the shamanism conference. And then when I had things here and his friend Jean Millay would be here, we would get together. So that's how he came into my life.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing that. And obviously you've met, I'm not going to ask you how you met all of them, but you kind of have worked with and done experiments with some of the real, the legends in these area, the parapsychological area. Of course, we've said Dean, we've said Russell, we've mentioned Stanley, but you also with Daryl Bem, Ed May, and probably the list is just going to go on and on and on. Anyway, one of the questions I had from Stan, I think he probably knows the answer to this, as he does with a lot of questions. But I think it's more, it's a good place for us to start getting really deep into remote viewing. So he said, she seems to be a talented remote viewer. Of course, he says seems to be because Stanley's very careful, with claimants and everything like that. But he would say that the evidence is definitely in support of it. She seems to be a talented remote viewer. And so you might ask her how she prepares for the task and how she begins to view at a distance. So yeah, how do you prepare for it and how does it kind of begin, I guess, initially? Let's talk about that.
Well, I think I should talk about the first remote viewing I ever did.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd never heard of remote viewing, so I had no idea what this was. But after that initial interview, Russell said, we'd like to work with you and we'd like to, I'm up here in Sebastopol. It's a 2-hour drive to Palo Alto, where we would be conducting the experiments at the, back then it was at Interval Research. And I had our youngest daughter, who was about one and a half or 2 years old then, and I was still breastfeeding. So here I was going to do these things, and I was driving down to Palo Alto to do this with them, and I was doing it all for free. I didn't know exactly what the task meant. So when I met them at the office, he said to me, because I've since then seen that there's all these different people where you can pay $2,000 or whatever, you can study remote viewing and learn to become a remote viewer. So I never did any of that. So I don't know. I couldn't tell you what that training or what that's about. I don't know.
Yeah, or if it's real or legitimate or not. But yeah.
But all I know is that whatever experiments they asked me to do, I would just ask, what is it you want? What's the what do you want me to, but I'd never actually understand what was behind the science or the statistics or any of this. Yeah. I would just want to do good for them. My intent would always be, I want to give you good data.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say that would be how I would enter the situation, is that I want to do a good job or be a good, subject.
Yeah.
So the way it started was, Russell said to me, I'm going to give you a piece of paper and a pencil, and I want you to, I didn't like sitting in a chair. So even though we were in an office, we would go into my husband's office because he had a very large office, and I would lay on the floor. Mm-hmm. I'd lay on the floor because that's where I felt comfortable doing this. And I like to close my eyes whenever I'm doing any of this kind of thing. So Russell would say to me, it's 1:00 right now, Gail. And at 3:00, we're going to show you a photograph that is one of 300 photos selected from a collection of National Geographic photos of places in the world. So they were all exteriors. It wasn't like you were going in, it wasn't an object like a box or a shoe or something like this. They were places.
Yeah, some kind of landscape or something.
Yes. And he said, and we want you to draw and tell me what you see. The person that does that, they call the monitor, or I forget what the other words are. And having done remote viewing now over the last 20 something years with different people, doing it with Russell is just the top experience I can have. Because for whatever happens in my connection and the way that he does it, I have had very successful remote viewings with him.
Good. He like brings out the best in you somehow.
Yes, it's not just me, it's all others. Dean commented once also that his method is, however he has something special that he brings to the remote viewing that is, it's just, you just do better.
Yeah.
So he said to me, so now I want you to take a pencil and draw what you see. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't draw. I draw stick figures. How am I going to draw what I see? So I have to write down words that say waterfall or whatever. And I hadn't been trained yet about how these are done, and how they don't want you to say it's the Eiffel Tower. They just want you to describe what you see, but never state that what it is.
Yeah.
So if it was to say the Eiffel Tower, you wouldn't say that. You'd say very tall structure. You'd say metal. You'd say designs or whatever things you would say.
Mm-hmm.
So I've learned so much about myself from doing these experiments with them because I didn't know I could do these things. So we do the drawing, and he says at 3:00 we'll see what comes up. And he said that my attention to detail was as good as a remote viewer named Pat Price, that was a very famous police officer. He said, my attention to detail was as good as Pat Price. I didn't know who Pat Price was. Now,
and this was your first go as well, of course.
These are my first session. We had 20 sessions.
First session, yeah.
Yes, so it was in those 20 sessions. And I would be drawing like a rock that I'd see in some spot, or I'd see some other different things. But I had one experience with this that I always like to share because it blew my mind. I would be judged at the end by Ed May. He was the judge of this particular set of trials.
Mm-hmm.
And we would do 2 on a Tuesday, once a week, until we completed the 20. So that was 10 weeks. And we'd do 1 in the morning when I'd first get there. Then Russell and I would break and go and have lunch together, which ended up developing a beautiful friendship that we have to this day. And after the lunch, we'd come back and do 1 more. And I would write some things down that I would get marked that, no, there's no people, there's no boat here, there's no car here where you said there was a car. And I'd sort of feel like, wow, I was sure that's what I felt or saw. And mind you, I don't actually see the car. I just have a sense of this.
Okay.
I say, oh, there's a car there. At the end of the
just to quickly jump in, hopefully I'm not going to make you forget your place, but so the car, do you hear the car? You don't see it, or you just know it's there? I
hear the word car.
You hear the word car, okay. Wow.
And when he'd show me the picture and it wouldn't have any of those things, and I'd say, God, I can't believe that. I really saw that in the picture. Well, later when I got to meet with Ed May after he judged all my work, I said to him, I don't know. I don't understand how I could get this wrong when there were so many times I felt there was a boat in one or there was a car in another. And there was ones where I'd say, I was sure there was people there. He'd say, oh, we erased all of those out of the picture.
The film crew.
Discovered these targets are better if we do it this way.
Yeah.
So it blew my mind that I was seeing the things that had been taken out of the picture.
Yeah.
And I felt a little pissed off about it because I'm not a scientist. And I felt like, how could you do that to me, you know?
Yeah.
But then I understand now they've been doing this for all the years and they know what a target attracts or what's easier for they know what they're doing with that. But for me, I'm seeing this other stuff that's been taken away. it started educating me about time.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because it's really like that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even though I'm doing them, I'm doing my own experiments with my own self. I'm just going to do whatever they want for them, and hopefully I'm getting them the data they need. But what matters to me is that I'm seeing that I'm doing stuff I had no idea I was capable of doing.
Mm.
And only because they're asking me to do these experiments. Not like I would ever thought, okay, Gail, tell me what's going to happen at 2 o'clock, 3 days from now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I really learned that whether it's the past, the present, or the future, that in that space of whatever it is that's going on, there is no time in there. There's no linear time. When I was doing those first things for the Mind Dynamics and the Werner Erhard group, and there was another man there, I was doing another teacher that I was doing a demo for. So we were driving to the hotel down in San Jose or somewhere south of San Francisco. They said to me, we want you to project, Gail, that the room will be filled and all the seats will be there for this talk, so that we'll be able to sign up a lot of people for the workshops. And every time they kept telling me to imagine the people in the seats, I kept saying, I know you want me to imagine people there. I said, but there's no people. I said, I see seats. I said, but there are no people sitting in them. And they're like, well, we're starting in an hour. The people should be coming soon, whatever. And we're driving there. We get there. We walk up to the conference room in the hotel. You know how we're talking about, the hotel scene with the big ballroom kind of things, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And they have the little sign in the black with the white letters there. Chairs are all set up. Stage is all ready. Microphones there. No people. They had the wrong day.
Oh no.
So it was all set up. They had the date there, but it was not the date that we were there just then for. So my telling them that I know you want me to project a positive, but I couldn't because there wasn't any there. And that's when I found out. So there's something that, that's like sort of a proof of time, or, that's like an in the moment present viewing. Picking out a picture and drawing it that you're not going to be shown for hours ahead, that has not been selected out of 300 pictures. How do you do that?
Yeah.
It would blow my mind when I'd see it. I'd say, wow, how did I do that? Well, the only way I can say that I could do that was by the fact that time wouldn't be like we see it. It would be like I'm looking at that photo in the present moment, even though it isn't really in linear time at that moment. It's really going to be 3 o'clock that picture will come up.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers the question.
It's hard to get the head around, isn't it? All of that stuff. Yeah. and more. Just with the pictures and stuff, it's just so hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Like the idea that there's so many variables and you get given so little information. Just like, oh yeah, we're going to, 300 pictures, we're going to choose one at random. It's going to be outdoor stuff, and that's apparently enough for whatever mechanism is going on here, like whichever framework is at play. It's like with mediumship, I guess, in the sense that sometimes, like with the Windbridge stuff, the studies, like they'll just give like a first name, and that just a first name, you're able to then access all of this information about one specific person, even though that first name is shared by thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands, whatever. Yeah, it's really weird, isn't it?
I kind of consider it magic or something. I don't. To me, I have no desire to understand that. I just know that that's what happens for me.
Yeah. And for you, you've been having these kind of experiences your whole life. So, yeah, I guess you've kind of worked it into, your worldview and your just general, as you say, just your kind of everyday experience. How much information would you say you need, like now, if you do this kind of stuff ever? Like, how much information would I need to give you if I wanted you to remote view something specific? Like, is it really, like we were just saying, it can be very vague and it just somehow it just finds the right thing? Or
well, I have to say, when you're doing the remote viewing, say, like I've done remote viewing for Stephan Schwartz, where we did it in a group.
Yeah.
And, it was about I think they were doing associative remote viewing. I can't remember. It was another type of remote viewing. And I didn't know how to do that kind of remote viewing. I just did the one that I know, which is whatever that is for me.
Yeah.
And on the first trial that we did, I think there was 6 or 8 of us in the group. We almost all said the exact same thing of what the object was. I don't know how that happened, or if there's a communal connection, or I'm not exactly sure. But I had never done that before, where we were remote viewing the same target together in just this little group of people, all on a Zoom.
Yeah.
And it was very successful the first time, and then sometimes then it went kind of up and down. And I think they're still doing it. I dropped out of doing it, but they're still doing it, I believe, and getting, very good results. Mm-hmm. I met interesting people there doing remote viewing, and they all have different protocols, because some have been trained to do it a certain way by this particular person, and some have taken a class from another person. So
yeah,
I don't have any of those. I don't have
it's like with the healing, right? It's very similar to that. It's like there's so many different ways that it can seem to work, obviously with different levels of accuracy and different, some of them work on different things. But I think it's the same as that. We're all just finding different ways to tap into this, whatever it is. And we're finding there's various ways to do it. So I guess that's the same kind of idea. There's so many different ways to be able to get into that remote viewing headspace. Yeah. And
there's like, when I had when my dad passed away in 2008, he was my closest person in my life, and it was really a tough thing caring for him while he was dying. Mm-hmm. And it took everything out of me. And at the end of a year, it took a year just to sort of recover from the care and the experience of the loss. And I felt that I would never be able to do another remote viewing or psychic thing again. Yeah. Because I was completely drained of everything. And Dean calls me up and says, I have a new experiment, the double-blind slit photon experiment. I don't know if you've heard about this one.
Yeah.
And he said, and I'd like you to come in and try it. And I said, I really shouldn't come in. I can't do anything psychic anymore. I'm just, there's nothing left of me. And my husband says, just go, you'll see, just go. And so I tell Dean ahead, I'm coming, but I'm not, I don't expect to give you good data.
Yeah.
So we go in and he locks me in the Faraday cage. For your listeners who don't know, it's an electromagnetically shielded box that kind of looks like a walk-in unit or something. The big heavy door with the big handle like that. And you go inside and you're sitting in what looks like a little mini living room, and there's a light and a table. But you're electromagnetically shielded from any interferences coming in. Mm-hmm. And my task was to use my mind to interfere with the laser as it's coming through the photon machine, because this can actually be physically shown while it's hooked up to the computer. The graph shows whether you've interfered with the photon. So it's like showing materially or physically the act of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So the first one he gives me to do, I really don't understand, and I'm still depressed and thinking there's nothing I could ever do again. So I say to him, I didn't understand the task. Could we do this again? So he says, okay, we'll do it again. And I look at the device, and it's a $20,000 box, and it's something he's just acquired. He hasn't had it for years or anything like this. And I look at it, and I just say, you know what? I'm just going to blow the whole fucking thing up. And the minute I say that out loud in the Faraday cage, all the lights go out in the Faraday cage. Really? And I'm sitting in pitch black darkness because there was no light in there, and the light is off. You are in darkness. And I'm thinking to myself, oh God, I hope I have not ruined his equipment. I didn't mean for my whatever to do this. And he comes rushing in, and he opens up the Faraday cage, and he said, do you know what you just did? And I said, yeah, I'm very sorry. I did something in here, and I crashed the machine. He said there was no electricity anywhere in any of the buildings on the IONS campus. He said there was no electricity and he said it's what we call an anomaly.
Yeah.
And it's not something I could reproduce. But all I kept telling him after I finished was, And it was a physical feeling. After I said I'm going to blow the fucking thing up, I felt like my mojo was back. And I could do psychic things again. And I could do all these things. And sort of like I blasted through whatever the year of sadness and grief over the loss of someone who meant so much to me had done.
Wow.
And they took some pictures and he wrote about it somewhere. And it wasn't considered. The problem about was when I crashed it all, the computer graphic could not show anything because there was no power.
Yeah,
and
he broke the computer.
Yeah, and he did. I used to do that at interval also. When I'd be too tired, the guy would come up, the IT guy would come up from the basement. He'd say, "What is she doing? Everything down here is crashing, you know."
Do you ever have that when you're at home and just you're stressed and you're having an argument or you're just having a bad day and you're like,
Not that I've noticed in electricals, but I might notice in energetic things where things just go flying around, you know, where all of a sudden something has more energy across the room or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's not something that, you know, it's not something I've done or worked with or developed or anything. It's just experience. Yeah. And so I learned then that, yes, I could have back all those different things that I didn't think I had anymore.
Yeah.
And I find this is something about a lot of people listening on these shows and things, is that they don't realize that they can tap into their own intuitive and gut level experiences and start to trust them. One of my podcast guests wrote me a sign that said, "Be proud of your inner being and voice." And I thought that that was such a beautiful statement to use to be settled in yourself and know that it's all okay. Yeah. Just listen to those voices. And when people say, "Oh no, I don't hear," I say, well, if you start listening to the voices or things that, or gut feelings, they become stronger the more that you put attention to the fact that getting a message, whether some people feel it's from God or it's from the angels or from the universe or whatever place it is that they may be getting that information from, that their body's sensing, they should listen to it.
Yeah. And we'll circle back to that because I'm going to ask you if there's any kind of advice and stuff for beginners, and maybe you can offer a few tips. But for now, and again, another thing I want to get to in a few minutes is talking about a few more of the experiments that you've been involved in. But before we do, just to kind of go back to, so when you were doing those first 20 sessions, although not that I just want to talk about those 20 sessions, but you're on the floor and you're kind of visualizing, and you mentioned the word car would kind of be audible to you. How was the rest of that going? Can you try and put me in your shoes? Like, so when there's a rock, do you hear a rock, or do you see?
I have a blank piece of paper, pencil, and then I would just start freely drawing shapes that felt like what I was seeing, like the picture. So
you're already seeing something. So that just, does that come in straight away? This kind of picture, does that kind of?
It's not like a picture. As I said, for me, it's like a knowing. There's water in here somewhere. Oh, there's a tree over here.
How frequently will it be accompanied by, like you mentioned, you heard the word car. So how frequently would something like that happen?
So when that would happen, while you're doing each viewing.
Okay, so that would be like every time.
Right, car.
Yeah.
What they taught me over the years was something called AOL, called analytical overlay. And I never understood what that meant till I did a whole bunch of remote viewings. And what happens is, for me in remote viewing, I've learned the thought or information that goes by very quickly in a flash. That's the information.
Right. Okay.
Repetitive thing in my head. Oh, looks like a bridge. I think I should be drawing a bridge. Do you think it's a bridge? Should I draw a bridge? Those are like what they call analytical overlay.
It's your brain trying to guess or something.
Yeah, brain is trying to say there's a bridge in this picture, and it might be because you just drove over a bridge, or you might have just looked at the last thing that was a bridge. I don't mean to keep going off track, but then I remember another story to tell you.
Yeah.
Two good remote viewing type incidences where two things where I learned. which was one was I was thinking when I was a teenager, and I would be doing this for my friends and family because they called them cases back then. So when I would do these, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, could you tell me about my mother?" Or "Could you tell me about, I want you to do this or that or whatever." So this was just amongst friends and, family. So my oldest friend, Esther, that I know, and we're still friends today since we're 5 years old, and her mother was like a second mother to me. And I always figured, maybe this remote viewing thing or this, whatever it is, this other stuff I'm doing, maybe it's these cases, maybe I'm reading the people's minds. And I'm not really seeing that they have cancer, or I'm not really seeing their emphysema or whatever this is. Maybe I'm just reading their mind. And that's why I'm saying, oh, this person, Joe Smith, has cancer. And it was in this little reading with my friend Esther that I learned it was not reading people's minds. Because she said to me, "I want you to tell me everything about my mother." And as I'm telling her about the different things that I'm scanning her mom's body in my mind, in the workshop in my mind, and I say to her, "Oh, she broke her right leg." To this moment, I don't remember exactly which it was, but it was an arm or a leg. And she said to me, "No, my mother never broke her leg. She never had a broken leg. That's not." I said, "Well, go home and ask her." So she'd go home, she asked the mother, "Did you ever have a broken leg or arm, whichever?" And her mom says, "Yeah, when I was a young girl, I broke such and such." So I knew then and there that I was not reading her mind. I wasn't reading Esther's mind, because in her mind, none of that had ever happened, because she wasn't even born when it happened.
Yeah.
And what I was reading was truly seeing the bones inside this woman's body and seeing the spot where it had been broken and saying it to my friend. So that's when I learned that those things were not, I was not reading people's minds. Then, there was another incident I wanted to share about. Well, forgot just a second. It was another remote viewing. Oh, well, it'll come back.
If it comes back to you, I've got a couple I'm going to ask you about as well that you've put on your Medium blog. So there's going to be a few more coming out. Don't worry.
So I thought that was when I learned that those things I was doing was not reading other people's minds, though I don't want to say I haven't read people's minds, because I have. So that's a I know that that's another type of reading.
Yeah. So again, just when you're in the process of remote viewing, and you have these kind of knowings, and you occasionally will hear the word or something like that, is there anything else that's just that I'm just kind of ascertaining if there's anything interesting? Sorry?
Bodily feelings.
Okay, yeah.
That was it. I wanted to mention that some of those remote viewings I did back in the first set of 20, I think it was in that group, or it might have been in my next batch. I'm not sure which batch, but Dean actually used 2 of the different remote viewings were shown to the Navy, because he gets invited as a guest for the yearly Naval Academy big gathering or whatever. Okay. And he showed my work, and they liked it very much. And so he said he brought it again another year, he said, because they liked my work. So I was kind of, that egotistically, I thought, well, my work was shown to the Navy,
Yeah. Well, it seems like you are one of the world's elite remote viewers by all accounts. I mean, there's obviously not a massive number of them that know, like, it's not like a NFL where you have loads of people trying to compete. It's a bit different. Yeah.
I can't take that in. But I recently did a project with Russell Targ, and he said that something similar to what you're saying is that I do have very good qualities of remote viewings, very qualities that he said a lot of people can't do that amount of, or whatever, something like that. It's very hard for me to take in any of the compliments from them, but there was something about that. And so what he did was he wanted me to, and Russell is going to be 90 this next year, so doing this work with him is not just my dear friend, but it's also an honor at this age, just the same with Stanley. These men are they're 90 years old, and their minds are as sharp as can be. They're brilliant. They're still writing books. They're still doing travel and experiments and what have yous. And I'm honored to have them as my friends. So when Russell called and said, I want to do a series of remote viewings because I want to like show your work or show somehow that your capabilities in the remote viewing world. He said something like, you're a world-class remote viewer. And I really couldn't take that in. And I sent the remote viewings to Dean Radin. He said, well, I don't know if I'd say a world-class remote viewer, but I'd say that the remote view you did was world-class.
Yeah. There you go.
The big, it's kind of a tall thing.
Yeah.
So do you want me to show the audience what a sample of that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
I have this book I put together here of the 13 remote viewings Russell and I did last December.
Yeah.
And we would meet on the phone at first and then after by Zoom. When I convinced him, I said, I think we should do this by Zoom. Then you can hold up the target. We can do this. So I have about five of these all recorded on Zooms. So what he would do is he would call me up and say, I have an object on my desk. And now I'd like you to sit back, take a deep breath, and tell me what you see. And I can't repeat his exact words, even though I've been listening to them for 20 years of how he gently guides you through this. And we would do things like, let's see, I'll show you one. They're rated from 1 to 7 is the Targ rating chart. And here's one there where I was rated 6. I've never been rated a 7 yet. I don't know what you have to do to be a 7, but I've never been a 7. But I have all 5s and 6s mostly. So this was the object. It's a icosahedron.
Yeah.
And while it's on his desk, he actually sent me the one I remote viewed. So often he sends me the actual object, cool. Which I cherish that.
Yeah. So
he's guiding me through. And what happens here is I draw my silly little pictures that don't make sense. Mm-hmm. And I have to write next to them what they actually are.
And so at that point, you're trying to capture, sorry to interrupt you, you're trying to capture the thing that's kind of zooming into your brain and not the thing that's...
And also I get a feeling.
Yeah.
So it might feel like energetic, or it might feel positive, or it might feel... So my feelings are involved with it, physical sensation. I just don't want you to think I see an actual picture.
What kind of physical sensation? No, I appreciate you really, like explaining it.
Chills, like, well, my hair could stand up for a minute, or I could get this warm, fuzzy feeling.
Okay.
So like with this one, I wrote, it's a metal feeling. So I'm feeling like it's metal. So that's why I'm writing metal feeling. I don't say metal, I say metal feeling. It's yellow, it has brightness. It's like a crystal energy. It's an image. The image I drew was a radiant heart shape. All the lines are the same.
Yeah. The
mathematical description of a Euclidean solid icosahedron is exactly what I wrote. All the lines are the same.
Yeah.
The AOL, because then I write on the side, when you know that it's analytical overlay, which I didn't know that 20 years ago when I was doing this, I wrote yellow religious symbol.
Right.
So then he rates it. And he says, I thought your description was excellent, even the healing elements. I am attaching our 7-point ranking scale from Stanford Research Institute. Thanks for your thoughtful and excellent help in looking at my new target. Love, Russ. So what he does is when he does remote viewing with groups, he's gone to Italy and to different countries where people don't even speak the same language. And he's able to guide them through, and they do beautiful remote viewings for the first time.
Yeah.
So what he does is when he has a new object, he asks me to remote view it first to see if that target would work, with a group of people.
Yeah,
so this was one of those kind of targets. So what he did was he asked me to do these, I think I did 13 different ones, and we made a chart here afterwards of each one, how it was rated, the date it was done. And over here shows the Targ's rating system. This is what was used back, in the 70s at the Stanford Research Institute.
Cool. Yeah.
With all the military and the CIA. They were discussing how they would be able to judge and rank these, and this was how it was put together.
Yeah.
So each one, 0 says there's no correspondence. So say 6, the one like I just showed you, if you read what a number 6 is, it's good correspondence with good analytical information, naming the function of the target, and relatively little incorrect information.
Yeah.
So most of these I did were 5s and 6s. It averaged out a rating of almost 5. For them, he said, this is a good, good results for the 13 that we did. So,
and I guess I should say, just for the skeptics that are listening and the people that are saying, yeah, come on, what's going on here? So there weren't, I'm assuming there weren't 100 that you ranked a 1 or 2 on that you've kind of thrown out. That's not the case here, right?
Nothing's thrown out.
This is 13 out of 13. There's no file draw problem here.
No, and Russell and I are both very honest people that would never, of course, listeners don't know us, but would never do anything like that to jeopardize a remote viewing, in any way. So they're unusual objects. And since I've noticed you did have some UFO things on some of your other podcasts, I thought I'll just show this last one, and I won't show you all these remote viewings, but this was one at the end of our 12th session. He said, normally we don't do 2, Gail. He said, but I have a photograph here where everything else has been an object on my desk. Oh, and by the way, on the object on the desk thing, the same thing would happen like in when I said there were cars or people, but they were raced out.
Right.
In this one, when we would start, he'd have the object there on his desk, but he had all these other objects that were on the desk, and I would be describing. I said, "Oh, there's a Buddha over here." There's so, and that makes me remember the story I wanted to tell you about another remote viewing experience.
Yeah,
this wasn't a remote viewing, but this was with Dean at the IONS lab, and it was called. I think this was the Gansfeld experiment.
The Gansfeld, yeah.
I think this was a Gansfeld, but don't, I don't want to. I'm not sure if that's exactly.
We won't quote you on that. Okay.
I think it was though, and I'd always wanted to do this, and I think this was it. We brought in someone who was a contractor that was working for me, and for some reason, when this contractor started working for me, I would know all these things about his intimate and personal life. So when he came the first week to get his paycheck, I said to him, I know you're in construction and you drive this big giant diesel truck, so kind of a, that kind of a guy. I said, but I see this image of you like, boxing and fist fighting. And I said, and I'm wondering, I don't know where this image is coming from. And he tells me how that was what he was doing as a young man in life. He was boxing and he was doing these things, fighting. He'd go to clubs and purposely pick fist fights with people. So he'd been this kind of, he said, I was a little guy, the shortest in school, so I had to fight my way through all this.
Yeah.
So Dean said, bring him in for an experiment. Well, when we brought him in, he was to sit in front of the target, and I would be in the Faraday cage in another part of the building, and I would have to, on video, say what he would be looking at.
Right.
So often for me, I get the information within the first 8 minutes. Okay. But these experiments are supposed to be 20 minutes long, and I don't know what else to do. I did the thing, now you want more, and I don't know what else to. So I ended up describing the things that were in Dean's office that my friend Tom was looking at. So when he'd be looking at whatever it was, a picture of people at the ocean or a statue or some sort of little thing in his office, I would start to describe it. Well, neither him, he never told Dean or I that I was doing that. So Dean and I didn't even know about this until a film crew came from Japan for a film that I was in a 3.5 hour about the paranormal, and they went and filmed people all over the world. And when they came here, they said, we're not going to put you in the film, but we want to interview you. Well, it ended up all going in the film. They ended up flying me up to Washington, and this man and his wife and my husband, and doing a brain experiment where I was in a functional MRI machine, which is different than your regular MRI. It shows the brain's functioning at that time.
Yeah.
I have to have a picture of my brain right here. And here we are. Here's the brain from that experiment. Brain.
It's a beautiful brain.
Yeah, it was. It was. And it's had a few blips since then, but I had to do telepathy with this man who I had, for some reason, knew all these different things about his life. And it continued on. The more that I knew him, the more of these things would come to me. So they discovered that during telepathy, there was a change of blood flow in the brain. So they found some data and some things, the neuroscientists who were, conducting this experiment. And of course, this was never supposed to happen, but it all did. And we were in the film, and it was shown in Japan and France and in the United States. It was one of the stories I had wanted to tell you. And there was one other one with him that also made me realize that there was something else going on. I learned I wasn't reading people's minds, but in this instance, he was a diver, and he would dive on the coast here for abalone. Mm-hmm. And he didn't come to work that, for a couple of days, whatever, they were diving. And when he comes back, I tell him, oh my God, I said, I had this incredible vision. I just was sitting in my house, and all of a sudden I was under the ocean. And in this one, I'm actually seeing. And I'm seeing all the seaweed, but it's like a grove of seaweed, like you're under the water and it's like a forest.
Yeah.
And everything is brown. And I'm thinking to myself, this is so weird. Why would I be looking at this entangled seaweed and not see greens and purples or other colors? And I get a panic, because that's often when I get information from other people, is when they're in danger. Or there's a heightened sense for them, and somehow I pick up the heightened sense. And it's happened to me in numerous relationships I have with men. And I get this fear that he's in danger and something's going to happen and he can't get out. So when I tell him the experience I have, he looks at me and says, that's exactly what happened. And I was entangled in the seaweed, and I was trying to get myself out of there. And he said, and the reason you don't see any color, he said, is because I'm colorblind, and I don't see any colors under the ocean.
And you didn't know he was colorblind?
I didn't know he was colorblind. I don't even know what colorblind was really like that. I didn't know. So they see some colors or whatever. So that was when I realized there was some sort of ability to be able to actually see through another person's eyes at that time. Those were the things I forgot that I wanted to say earlier. So sorry if I interrupted it. I can go back to our remote viewing thing now.
Back to the UFO. But that's crazy, isn't it? Like the seeing through, what somebody else is seeing. It's kind of like telepathy meets remote viewing. It's maybe it needs a new name. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
What was I saying? My husband's been grateful for some of them, because I'll know something that's happening to him, and I'll come home and pick up the exact keys on the ground that he's been trying to find for the last hour. And I just walk in, pick it up, and say, here, So there's good uses of these things.
Definitely.
So Russell says to me at the end of our object viewings, while I have a photograph, I'd like you to do a remote viewing on. And I say, sure. I say, okay. And these are the things I say about the photograph. The first thing I come on with is it could be a rocket ship. Then I say propulsion. Mm-hmm. And Russell stops for a second in the interviewing and says, I've never heard you say that word in 20 years, Gail. Then I say energy, powerful, there are no colors. And then I write very tall, like the Eiffel Tower. Now, you wouldn't write Eiffel Tower. That would be sort of like AOL. This is Gail's remote viewing target received over the phone. I asked her to describe the photo I had on my desk. Usually we use an object. I am told that this is a well-documented Canadian black and white flying saucer photo. Russ Targ, rated 6. So here's the picture.
Yeah.
Here's
This one, it's actually from Scotland, this one. It's from Calvine in Scotland.
So you know it. Well,
yeah, it's just to give you a really quick background. It was like one of those photos that there was lots of attempts to recreate it for years, and it was kind of rumored. And then a couple of years ago, somebody actually found an old copy, and they managed to get it public again, like the original.
Resurfaced.
Yeah.
Oh, so well, this is great. If I didn't show this to you now, I'll have to call him after and let him know that it was Scotland.
Yeah. The Calvine incident, that's known as the Calvine. I can email you some info after.
Yeah, send me the info on it.
Yeah.
And you can't see because it's too hard here, but I'm drawing circles going like this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And often on some of these experiences, I go inside the building or inside the thing, and I see more information, but it's not part of the remote viewing, so they can't tell you, there was this inside, or there was that.
Accurate or not accurate.
Right, so you don't have an answer to that. This one, he said, Jacques Vallée had said nobody would be able to remote view this target because I think he said it was multidimensional.
Right.
And he said, I just want you to know, Gail, you've proved that this target can be remote viewed. So he was really testing to see whether I could do this, but he didn't tell me that till after the remote viewing was done.
Yeah. So does that mean we can remote view interdimensional objects, or does that mean it wasn't interdimensional?
I don't know. All I can tell you is I definitely made contact with whatever this particular object was and my descriptions of it. So
what did you see on the inside again? Say again what you kind of perceived there.
See if I can see in my. There are no colors. Positive feeling, energy. It just had something to do with being very powerful, and it's really hard to read.
No worries if it's too.
Yeah. I can give you a better example of an inside one, which was the first talk I ever gave was filmed by a man named Lloyd Auerbach.
Yeah, I know Lloyd well. Yeah, I've spoken to Lloyd a couple of times.
I just went on the U.S. Hornet for an evening of darkness to connect with spirits on the ship.
Yeah.
It's a very amazing experience. But anyhow, he filmed this talk I gave for the woman Ruth Inga Hines, who said I should be giving talks back then.
Yeah.
So the first talk I gave was about a remote viewing I had done of a giant mosque type building. And I had written in it, which I told in the talk, I said, I got a very good rating on this, on the remote viewing, because I drew all the parts and how the building, the structure looked. Mm-hmm. I said, but I never got an answer. I said, because I kept telling them, I see mosaics. I see mosaics here everywhere. And Ruth pipes up and says, I have been, with her German accent, I have been to Istanbul. That is where it is. And it has the most beautiful mosaics in the world enclosed inside that building.
Yeah.
So I got to hear years later something I had remote viewed the answer to.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool.
So that would be an easy one to tell you of what it was like to see inside the building, but not have it. So I always thought, well, I don't know what was it. I never knew the answer or where that was Istanbul. So it was wonderful to hear from someone who'd actually been in the building itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where to go next. There's so many things I want to cover before we finish our time together. I guess let's leave advice for kind of towards the end. So maybe let's jump into a couple more stories now while we're kind of we're doing stories. So there was a few that you covered in your Medium blog. So I guess first of all, it was one where you were at one of these conferences, and it was the Shiva, I think, if that rings a bell.
Oh, the dancing Shiva.
Yeah, the solid 8-legged. Yes. Yeah.
I won't leave I could go get you that statue too, but it was at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and it was about 80 in attendance, and a lot of them were scientists.
Yeah.
And Daryl Bem was giving a demonstration. These both things happened at the same time, at the same, conference. Daryl Bem was giving a demonstration about how you can be, because there's so many ways people can trick you, and there's so many ways that people can deceive other people, and and people that prey, like mediums that prey on people who were lost someone, and they want to get
vulnerable
at them, and there's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So he was trying to show this audience of scientists how even a scientist can get fooled. So he does this demonstration, and then I'll get to the Shiva one. And he does this demonstration, and he says, I have something in this paper bag that nobody here knows what it is. And at the time, I was sitting next to Jeffrey Mishlove.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
Held the paper bag up. I just said, oh, it's a sand dollar. And, the only people who heard me say that were the people sitting next to me, And Daryl Bem opens up the bag, and he pulls out the sand dollar. And Jeffrey Mishlove, I think, or someone jumps up and says, that's what she just said, that there's a sand dollar in the bag, right? And after he does the demo about it was all trickery, but I didn't do trickery.
Yeah.
How he got the sand dollar and where it came from and all that was all part of the trick. So when he got off the stage, he came up to me and he said, Gail, he said, what I was doing was magic. He said, but what you did was real.
Yeah, yeah.
So
magic with a K.
Right. And then Russell came up and he said, I want to guide you all in a remote viewing. He said, I have an object here in the same thing in a paper bag, and I want you to sit down and each person take a piece of paper and draw, what comes to your mind, how do you feel, what, like this. And then at the end, he says, and I'd like somebody to raise their hand and hold up what they have. So I was in the back of the room and I just raised up my hand and I said, I can't draw this well. I said, but an 8-armed Shiva on a lotus space. And it's made out of brass. And he was like stunned for a minute. He couldn't even say a word for a second. And then he said, Gail is my friend. He said, but I purchased this object last night, but she has never seen this object. And he said, and I just want you to know that this was not and I didn't realize it, kind of ruined it for the other people.
Yeah, you ruined it. He wanted you to say a gold thing. It's something gold and metallic, and it's something with lots of lines coming out of it or something. And you had to just go and get the exact object, like perfectly.
So, and that was, back in the ions, that was many, 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 many years ago. I've had some really fun ones with him, with other objects, with lights and things. And my feeling is, so what do you do with this remote viewing? Mm-hmm. What are things that could be done that would actually be helpful to people besides describing an object?
Yeah.
And
apart from spying, because spying is obviously the obvious one. We all think of spies straight away.
Right. Well, right. They were very successful with that. And so well, in one of those groups with Stephan Schwartz, there was one time I had remote viewed into 2060, and that was a phenomenal experience. Remote view, saying I'd never done anything like that. It was very interesting. But in that other group that we were in, there was a gentleman there, and he had used, I think it's called associative remote viewing. I'm not sure, but it's where you use coordinates. And he sat in his home in Oklahoma. This is my friend Randy, and Randy's Anesis, and we became friends after these podcasts. He remote viewed for Kenya 5 different areas where they could drill for water in a drought-stricken communities.
Right.
And he was able to, on a map in Oklahoma, pick the spots where they should drill. He sent the coordinates and information to the chief of the village there, and they went to the sites, and they were able to successfully drill 5 holes of water to keep these village people with water.
That's insane.
He said, they wrote to me and said, we would like to give you a goat and my first daughter. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
He said, well, I really can't take a goat here right now, and my wife is not allowing a second wife. He said, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
For no money, this was something he did to help other people. And he really did something that helped other people.
Yeah.
Remote viewing. So besides using it for spying into military situations,
Yeah.
I thought this was a phenomenal use of remote viewing to be able to help people.
Oh, yeah.
Village somewhere to find water.
Yeah.
I'm not
Can't
saying
think of
that
much
I'm
better.
capable of doing any of those things, but I have met someone who has.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, definitely. I guess another thing that would be useful for, and I suppose we could think of loads if we sat down and, they really kind of had a brainstorm. But one that I was thinking of this morning is, if you have like a team of remote viewers, whatever, 5, 10, 20 people in like a room together in an office, and you kind of get calls, missing people calls, and you've got all these remote viewers trying to locate them, which obviously brings us on to the next story that I wanted to ask you about as well. What were you going to say? Is that something else?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that would be the other one I know of that exists with remote viewing. And I think it's Pam Coronado. And I'm not sure who the other person is, but I got involved once with a group called the Psi Squad, PSI Squad. And the woman who was the founder of it, and I'm not sure if it's still on today because she passed away, and one of her associates was taking it over, but she worked with the police departments around the United States for about 20 years or more. Mm-hmm. It would never be disclosed that they worked with her to do these things. Yeah. But I had met her at an international remote viewing conference, and she was doing a demonstration where she handed out 100 pennies, and everyone held 1 penny in their hand. And she told everyone that these pennies came directly from the bank in a tube, and had not been handled by anyone except from the bank to be given to her person. She said, there's a person in this room of 150 people that are here who took these pennies, and for 1 week, every single thing they did, the penny was on their body except in the shower. Otherwise, it was with them continually. So when you hold this penny, I want you to know that all this information is held in the penny. And when you hold the penny, it will tell you everything about the person. So I didn't know that you could have an object and it could tell you these things until I did this with Beverly Jaeger. And I held the penny in my hand and I said, oh my God, the person who held this was the guy I had lunch with yesterday. Really? And I said, I didn't think this. I said, oh, the guy I met was dressed a certain way. And I said, this person was a lawyer, he did this, he did that. And I had all this information, and you write it down, and then the person is sitting in a room so that when you're finished, you get to go into the room by yourself and see what the person is and show them the information and find out, is any of that true? Yeah. So when I wrote down, oh, this is Lance, so-and-so was the one who's carrying the penny, and I just met the guy for lunch. And I go in the room and that's him sitting there. I say to myself, oh, wow. Objects really do hold information and energy. This is a fact. Yeah. I didn't know that until I tried this. Like, I'm not a skeptic, but I also don't just accept everything. I didn't believe in table tipping until Stanley invited me into a group, and I would meet with Stanley, Krippner, and these other people at this home. And once a month we do table tipping. Really? And it got to a point where the table was going around the room, and we learned all these things about table tipping. But until I did it and saw it, I couldn't say whether table tipping was really true, the same as spoon bending or any of these things. But if I experience it for me, it's true for me. It may not be true for another person, but to me that it is.
Does the object thing, does that ever happen to you non-intentionally? Does somebody ever say, oh, can you just hold this for a second, Gail? And then you're seeing something about, what happened with them or their object or whatever. I think it's called psychometry. Am I right in that? There's a thing.
It's psychometry. I've held things where I might get a bad feeling about it. I don't feel good about this. And in this particular one with finding the missing persons, I just wanted to finish that.
Yeah, sorry.
That group asked me to come in and do, they had a missing person case. And I had never done this before. For your audience who wants to know what a missing person case was like to do, when they called me up, they said, there's 5 different psychics working on this particular thing, and they send them each an object of the missing person. I was the only person who didn't receive an object, but everybody else got the object. And they hold the object, and then they write the feedback of what they get. Then the people in the Psi Squad read each transcription of what the people wrote about the object, and wherever there's a strong connection where they all say it was at a cliff, or they all say it was a murder, whatever they say that they find in commonness, they write as the final report, because they're getting the information from 5 different people in 5 different states around the country. That people aren't meeting each other.
Yeah.
So they asked me to do this, and I'm a very emotional person, and I'm a very sensitive person. And I found this work like exhausting for me. I was coming upon scenes that were very heavy. I could feel the foul play or the murder or whatever had happened to the person. I didn't like the experience of, even though it was a good thing to give them the information, for me, it felt very uncomfortable to do that because of the kind of situations this was. So that was one that I did officially, that people do, and it is going on today. And they do help the police department, but the police department will never say that they got information from such and such a group or a psychic. The other one I did was the one that I didn't know I could do this.
Yeah, the spontaneous.
This all happened. I had a psychiatrist in Berkeley that was a very well-known, famous psychiatrist there. And he had read the manuscript of my book, A Small, Medium, at Large. And after he read it, he said to me, someday I might call you. And I didn't really know what he meant by that. And some 6 months later, after he'd read my book, he calls me up and he says, I have a patient in my office right now, a young man whose mother has been missing for 8 days. And we'd like you to know if you could tell us where she is. I was like, I was doing dishes, the phone rings and this request, and I'm like, can I do this? I don't, what does he say? I'm washing dishes. So I close my eyes, and he puts the son on the phone. And I get this information immediately that there's something to do with cancer. The woman is deceased, and she's in a car on the side of the road by some big giant boulders. I cannot tell you where these images come, or this picture in my mind, or whatever this is. I don't know.
But it's a knowing, right? Not so much the picture. Just to try to clarify again. I'm just trying to make sure.
Yes. And after I say the words, I can see an image in my mind.
Okay, then it kind of builds, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I say to him, I ask when the son gets on the phone, I feel nervous because I feel like my information might be correct, but maybe it isn't. What do I know about missing people? I don't know. I'm not going to tell the guy, oh yeah, your mother's dead. I'm not one of these that says I know everything.
Yeah. And obviously that's heavy information to give to somebody if you're not sure about it, right? Like that's
why I don't go into that particular thing.
Yeah.
But people who aren't as emotional, I think they can do it, they can handle it, but I start crying, So I said to him, when was the last time you saw your mother? And he says, we were together for the holidays, and she went back to Colorado, where she just moved recently. And when I got back home, I hadn't been able to hear from her. I'd been calling and calling, and there was no answer. And she moved in with this guy. And I say to him, did your mom have cancer? And he said, no, my mom was as healthy as can be. She's a, outdoors woman. She wanted to live there. It was a better area to live in Colorado. And she's fine. And then I say, well, what do you feel inside? I said, because you're connected to her better than anyone else. You're her son. And he said, I'm not sure if she's still with us anymore. And I say, well, you should trust your gut feelings.
Yeah.
And I say, can I speak to the psychiatrist? Psychiatrist gets on the phone and I start going into a rant. What am I going to do? I don't know what to tell this person. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Maybe his mother's alive and fine. I said, but this is what I felt. I said, she died. She's, in this car and she's by the boulders and she's gone. So he calls me back 3 hours later and he says, I spoke to the Colorado Police Department. He said, they want me to ask you a question. He said, they'd like to know, do you think there's foul play? That the boyfriend or some other person did this to do this to her. And I was so sure of my knowingness that I didn't even have to go through the end of the question. I said, no, this had nothing to do with anyone else. Because when I went to the scene, I felt no negative, scary feelings like I did with the other woman that we had to look for that was in the desert somewhere, missing, dead, or whatever. Mm-hmm. That one was like a violent, scary feeling. This was not. This was a feeling of she passed on, she's gone. Nothing else involved, no people, nothing. So he says, all right, I'll call them again and tell them you said, and he kept asking me again and again, no foul play.
Yeah.
Later that day, they found a letter when they went through her house. Everything was still in the house. Her purse, everything was exactly as it had been left. Nothing was touched. She hadn't been, nothing in her house, like somebody wasn't in there stealing things. And they found a letter she had written. When she was in Berkeley visiting with the family before she moved, she was diagnosed with a cancer that was not curable and there was no treatment, and that she just put her papers in order and prepared to die. She decided that she didn't want to put her family through that torture, and they didn't have much money, and she didn't want to go through all this loss for them to watch her to die this way. So she pulled over in her car and she took her life by asphyxiate, whatever you call it, carbon monoxide poisoning in the car. And they found her with her head slumped over the steering wheel. That was another thing I had said, that she was slumped over the steering wheel. And that's how they found her. And she was on the side of the road where there were big, giant boulders. I never wanted to do any more after that. After those two. I mean, that for me, it was very emotional. I felt like, also to the son, like, I don't want to say, I said to the psychiatrist, I hope I said the right things. I wouldn't want to do anything to hurt another person or any of this. He said, no, everything you said was fine. Everything you said, was good for him. And those two incidences made me not ever want to do looking for missing people, because I'm just not cut out for it emotionally.
Yeah, it's totally understandable. I mean, it's heavy, isn't it? But what an incredible experience that one was, like, with how accurate everything turned out to be and how it was so spontaneous, just falling into your lap like the phone. It's not like you had any preparation time. It's not like, Gail, come into the office tomorrow, I want you to talk to this guy about this. Just totally out of the blue.
I had to put the sponge down. I mean, it wasn't
dripping sponge, like soap all over the floor and stuff. Yeah.
And that's everybody operates differently. That's how I operate. I'm good with spontaneous or whatever. Yeah. I don't do readings. People have called me up. Do you do readings? No, I don't do readings. I don't do anything where it's connected with money. I won't do anything to be paid to do something. Yeah. I don't mind if I do a scientific experiment and they want to pay me for my gas and my time driving there. But anything that has to do with what I call the universes, energies, or any of this, I feel that's all freely given, and for me, it should be freely given back.
Yeah.
The only readings I do are when I'm with somebody and I get a feeling, and I just say to them, da 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 da. Or if I do a shamanic blessing on them, I'll hear information, and I'll just say, "Did you have the?" I heard a message from your mother saying you're supposed to go out and enjoy life. Yeah. And, I know she's deceased. And I said, and I don't think she would have even said that to you when she was alive. Then the person shakes their head and says, yes, that's exactly who she was, So I have that kind of stuff. But I don't like say to someone, oh, come to my house. I'll give you a reading. I'll tell you about you. That's not my thing.
No, cool. I like how you operate with it. It's brilliant. How many? I'm not expecting a definitive number here, like an approximation. How many of these experiments with the Deans, the Edmays, the Russells of the world? How many do you think you've been involved in up to now?
I'd say maybe I've done a dozen different types of experiments.
Right.
And some of them I can't even remember, like
Yeah.
they were testing different physiological things. Like,
Yeah.
I just
Presentiments
saw
and stuff.
pictures I posted on Facebook of me with some kind of a device all over my head with little electrodes all over. I don't even remember what that one was for. I think we were
Yeah.
looking at pictures to see whether the people were dead or alive, and if you could tell in the photo.
Interesting.
So I did the original remote viewings that they did at Stanford. They would have a person at an actual site, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the other person, the remote viewer, would be sitting and so there would be an actual physical person looking at the place.
Yeah.
I didn't get the joy of doing that until Russell was making his film Third Eye Spies. And if you watch the film, they have an extras at the end of the film, and I'm in the extras doing this 6-minute remote viewing with Russell, where a gentleman, but I didn't know if it was a man or a woman. There was someone out in Petaluma walking around at places, and when they get to the place, and it was all done with GoPro cameras,
Okay.
and they didn't have that back in the 70s when they were doing these.
No.
So he would be going with that, and I was sitting in Dean's office, and Russell and the filmmakers were filming me say the different things that I was experiencing or feeling. And so like there would be things like where I'd say, I feel like this person wants a cup of coffee, so that's not like, I don't know how to explain that as a feeling, but
Yeah.
person later verified, yeah, he was on the schedule, so he couldn't, but he was standing right in front of the coffee spot and really wanted that cup. Or I mentioned how a dog just went by, and though it's not in the video, the person that was there verified, yes, a dog did go by right then.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was the only time I'd had that kind of experience of doing the ones from the old days.
Yeah,
That's
that's fascinating. Though,
yeah.
I wonder why. I would love to know, more about like why and how. I'm not asking you because I'm not.
So would they.
Yeah, I know. It just like maybe he loved dogs. Maybe he's really passionate about dogs, and so this dog passes, and he's like, "Oh, that was such a cute dog," and I know I'm supposed to focus on the experiment, but cute dog, and so then dog comes through. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting though. So you mentioned earlier remote viewing 2060 with Stephan Schwartz.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Nobody ever asked me to do something like that, and
Yeah.
it's written 2 papers on it. I think it's out now. I think you can look it up. I think he spoke about it on the Jeffrey Mishlow Thinking Aloud show.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of views, so I know it's out there. Apparently he had done one for 2030, I think, a couple of years earlier. I wasn't involved in that one, but they wrote up the information of thousands of people's remote viewings to see, what was the same.
Mm-hmm.
So on this one of the 2060, when he asked me to do it, I didn't know. I don't know, it just felt weird to me. How would I do this?
Yeah.
But I always agree to just try and see what happens. It ended up being about a 1-hour interview, and I had filmed it all on my Apple phone. And then when I traded my phone in for a new one, all the data was, but he has it all filmed there somewhere. I know the date. It was December 15th, 2019. And when we started, and I just like closed my eyes for a second. He asked me all these questions, and it was sort of, in this one, it was like a movie in my head.
Right. Okay.
And I was watching this movie come about that would be in response to his questions. And I don't know where the movie came from. I don't know where this information comes from. I'm not a sci-fi person. But I was seeing things that some of it emotionally moved me to tears. I was crying in some of the interview.
Mm-hmm.
I gave an hour's worth of information, and I can only remember a few of the highlights of the things I said.
Share with me the highlights then. Yeah, I'm interested to hear what you can.
some drawings. I did some drawings, but I only had a Post-it note in front of me, so they were on little Post-it notes, these little drawings. And they were questions like, what does money look like? What is it like in the city? When you see the whole planet, how does that, there were these kind of questions.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, the whole video story would come up in answer to them.
Wow.
And some of it was very sad. And some of it was very, like, I couldn't find children. And it seemed like I was popping around to different places on the planet. And when I finally found children, it wasn't in cities, it was in places in the country, and I would see families there. Yeah. When I went to the cities, it was all sort of like drones or something. Everything was kind of grayish, and the cars were all the same. Yeah. And they were shaped sort of like a triangle, kind of like that. And they had very soft rubber wheels underneath, and there was no sound. And they didn't go on the ground, and they didn't go up high in the sky. They were like a couple of feet above the ground. And when I looked at it, it reminded me of like a thoroughfare, of one's going this way and one's going this way, but not in traffic, just in a formation.
Right.
And it was very quiet. When he asked me about money, I said, there is no money. There was no money. There was only a card with lights built into it. And it looked like a credit card kind of a thing. And there wasn't an exchange. Like, you didn't give that and get something in return. This was your money. It was something to do with something in this card and the lights that would light up in this card.
Wow.
And that was weird to me.
Yeah.
And then it was very sad and depressing in the city. And the only place that I could feel like there was life or that sort of thing was when you went away from the cities into more of a rural or remote area. And I seemed to be in the snow. And I remember him saying to me, where are you in the snow? I said, I know, it's December, I said, it's snowy where I am right now, and then all of a sudden I'd be in another part, so whatever question he would ask me, somehow this video would come up of information. And later when they reviewed it, he told me I did very well, which I don't know what that could possibly mean, because we don't know what's 2060. Yeah. But I guess I said similar things that other people also had said.
Yeah.
The reason that I wanted my recording, and he's such a busy man, he said he'd send it to me, but I never received it because I think he's just too busy, is that my daughter would be the exact age that I was doing that remote viewing in the year 2060. Yeah. So I thought to myself, if I could leave her that little piece, she would be able to see whether any of the things I had said then actually was what 2060 was like.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I can't remember everything, but it's sort of like going into another dimension or something.
Yeah.
I'd have to see the video again. I just remembered how emotional I got, and I started crying at a certain point, and I don't remember now what all the questions were. It was 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, 2019.
You mentioned countryside. Sorry, carry on.
Yes, and COVID came shortly after that. So I started to wonder, did some of the things that I was saying, did it have to do with the fact that COVID was coming? Because the thought of when we kept saying, there's no children everywhere I go, it made me think about what happened when COVID became intense and people were not bringing their kids to the supermarket. Kids weren't going to school. Things were, kids were like removed. So I wondered whether any of the things that were coming to me was the immediate future and not 2060, but I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out in 30 something years.
But I think he has the paper about it, or I believe it's, or you can hear the lecture, and he did thousands. So I'm just a little speck in that collection.
But as we've said, as a world-class speck, Gail, a world-class speck. But yeah, that's fascinating. I suppose you don't remember. I mean, you mentioned there were kids in the countryside and stuff like that. So there was countryside, like there was
Yes.
at least some green left, some trees, and some semblance of nature.
Yes, but I had to go away from
Yeah.
cities to go to
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, that doesn't sound surprising, really. I don't think at this point, like, but yeah, it's really interesting. Is there nothing else jumping out at you that you remember from that experience? No worries, I'm just checking.
As I said, it's an hour, so I know there's a lot of information, but I don't know. I just let it flow out, so I have no idea.
Yeah.
I really would have to, and I've never heard it since.
No worries. I understand.
Maybe I'll send him a text again and say, if you have a chance.
I was just thinking that I'll send him an email as well, try and get it for you. I feel like you should have that. Yeah. What was I was just kind of instantaneous lost my thought. Maybe you took it from my brain. Maybe
sorry.
No, I don't know. I don't know. Something about remote viewing in the future. Either way, a couple of other kind of more bizarre things I wanted to ask you about. So there was something I heard Dean Radin say just a couple of weeks ago on a podcast, or an interview, some kind of conference thing he was doing with Avi Loeb. So kind of two great minds, very different minds, but both great minds in their own field, kind of pushing boundaries. Like Avi's a professor at Harvard looking into UFOs, UAP, and obviously Dean, we know Dean. Anyway, he mentioned something to Avi. He said, he talked about SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. That's like, they have this in the US, and they use like radio waves and stuff like that, and they kind of trying to pick that up, and that's how they're looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. And Dean said, with all the evidence that we have for remote viewing, would it not be like a much more like worthwhile pursuit to have a bunch of remote viewers trying to see if they can kind of perceive any other non-human consciousness out there in the galaxy or wherever, rather than SETI? And I just thought that was really interesting, so I just wanted to get your kind of your 2 cents on it, really, your thoughts on it.
Well, my thoughts are, I'm sure that he could do that, conduct an experiment, gather remote viewers and see what information they came up with, or what contact, I myself personally had a UFO type experience when I was in my 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was when I was curious as to whether there was something else out there.
Right.
And I found it to be a very frightening experience.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of my conversation with Gail Hayssen. Please stay tuned for part 2, where Gail shares that UFO type experience. We discuss remote viewing UFOs, remote viewing the past and future, and more. Please subscribe to Gail's YouTube channel and have a scroll through her videos to see if any of her awesome guests catch your eye. Please subscribe to our channel if you want to continue unraveling the universe with us. Thank you for your support.